arms towards the sun, you feel the warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive and you don't have to be afraid of anything, 'cause you know the truth, and the truth is love, yes it is. Wasn't what they said to you or anything that you learned from a book or from the news. It's not like that, 'cause it's a thing. It is something that you do. Doop 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 doo. Doop 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 doo. Doop 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 doo. Dib on baby did long. Doop 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 doo. Doop 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 doo. Doop 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 doo. Dib on baby did love's the highest truth. Nothing could be higher than love, my friend.
Welcome to the Bassline, everyone. Dr. Kimberly Biss is an obstetrician and gynecologist with many years of experience. Her practice is in Florida, where she has observed disturbing trends since the rollout of the experimental COVID injections falsely marketed as vaccines. She was kind enough to do a written interview with me for my Substack back in January, and today she joins us for a live interview here on the Bassline. It is with great joy and gratitude that I welcome to the Bassline my friend, Dr. Kimberly Biss. How are you today, Dr. Biss? Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you perfectly, ringing like a bell. So, Dr. Biss is just an awesome person, I have to say. I reached out to her several months ago and asked if she would do an interview. And because of scheduling things at that time, it was more realistic to do a written interview, which we did and is available at my Substack. And we planned on doing this interview for some time now, and here we are. And I think it's such an important discussion because we're trying to assess the harm that has been inflicted across society, across the world, because of this coercive injection campaign where they were so adamant that everyone needed to be injected with this gene juice formula, whatever the heck it is. And now we see injuries of all kinds. We see cardiovascular injury. We see leading cardiologists trying to warn the world that, hey, this stuff has inflicted damage to people's hearts. Subclinical myocarditis is rampant, according to some leading cardiologists, Dr. Asim Malhotra, Dr. Peter McCullough, to name two. But then we have oncologists warning of strange tendencies in cancer. The term turbo cancer has emerged. Some people have disdain for that term. They say, oh, that's conspiracy talk. There's no such thing as turbo cancer, which I find strange for anyone who's not an oncologist to just jump in and make some statement as though they know everything that's going on in global oncology. But here we have an OB-GYN, because it was warned going into this campaign that these shots would potentially affect fertility, that they might affect reproductive health, and so on. Again, I didn't know what was going on. Most people didn't know what was going on. But then we saw information indicating, well, yes, it actually reduces your sperm count to receive these injections. There was a peer-reviewed study indicating that. And they had hoped optimistically, well, we hope it will return to normal at some point. They hoped. And then I remember seeing in a very generic article, I mean, there's many articles about it, but as a really generic example, there was an NBC article that just said women's periods had been affected by this, that their menstrual cycles had been altered on account of these shots. They said 40% of recipients noticed a change, a noticeable change in their menstruation. And I wondered at that point, well, where's the Me Too movement? Why aren't people just completely outraged and disgusted that people made these sweeping policies that would then go on to affect women's bodies, including young girls, men and women, but specifically women having period irregularity, and we just think that's okay? We'd respond more to someone's unsavory remarks than we would about people's bodies being damaged and their fertility being affected. So this is where we get into the recognition that we live in some sort of Twilight Zone scenario, some sort of zombie land kind of scenario. Because if you take a look at my interview, my written interview with Dr. Biss, my questions are very straightforward, actually. If anyone wants to accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist or whatever, which they are free to do, there's no indication of me being a so-called conspiracy theorist in my interview with Dr. Biss. My questions are very straightforward, and her answers are very straightforward and concerning. So that raises the question, why can't we have a serious discussion about these serious matters? That doesn't make any sense, right? We're so concerned and we're so educated, but we can't have a serious discussion about serious matters. So with that being said, I want to get right into this incredible perspective that you have to offer, Dr. Biss. You've noticed some really disturbing trends in women's health in your firsthand observations. And I would love for you to give us a rundown of what you've observed in the past 4 years. And I guess if you could cap that off in terms of explaining to us also where we are now. So what you've observed in the past 4 years, and have these negative trends continued?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I just want to set the stage with your audience to kind of discuss the fact that these are not vaccines. I don't call them vaccines. They're genetic therapies, and so I refer to them as injections. They were called vaccines so that people would readily take them because people have been taking vaccinations for decades. And sadly, I still have patients that think these injections are very much analogous to any flu vaccine or other vaccine they've ever had in their, previous histories. But these therapies they're RNA injections. They're not naturally occurring messenger RNA that we all have in our bodies that basically get the code from our DNA and our nucleus and our cells and leave our cells and go into our cytoplasm and create our proteins. They don't float freely in our body, which is what the early research showed was a problem when they were trying to create this technology for the last couple decades. And they found when they injected the RNA into the bloodstream, the body very quickly got rid of it. So what did they have to do? They had to modify the RNA, so hence the name Moderna. And what they did was they replaced the natural molecule in RNA that's called uracil with a pseudo-uridine, which allows for this RNA that's injected in these injections to survive in the body for a very long period of time, not get broken down, and your immune system won't recognize it. So this is a modified RNA product that's packaged in a fatty envelope that are the lipid nanoparticles, and that fatty envelope is what attaches to your cells and delivers this substance into your cell cytoplasm. And then there's no shutoff valve or mechanism, and basically turns your cells into a spike protein machine. And they only studied up to 6 months to see how long this lasted in patients. So they said, yes, there are some where it lasts up to 6 months, but they didn't study it any longer than that. So we really don't know how long it will be in the body and be produced in the body. And we have very many vaccine-injured patients that are still showing spike protein when they're tested for that. So these are not vaccines. These are genetic therapies. So let's, just recognize that. The second thing with obstetrics, we have a FDA drug classification system, A, B, C, D, and X. And that's so practitioners can reference whether or not a drug they want to prescribe to a pregnant woman is safe to do so. And Category X drugs should never be given to pregnant women. In the trials on these agents, there was great harm done to the animals in the trials, and I would certainly say that these injections should be classified as a Category X drug and never should have been given to any pregnant women. And, just full disclosure, I was very suspect of these from the get-go, and I didn't ever recommend them to any of my patients, specifically my obstetric patients. So I just kind of wanted to set the stage with those 2 points. But basically, my story and what I saw as a concern, I did see early on some issues with the menstrual irregularities. I did not track that in my practice, but what I did track was my miscarriage rate. So my story is as follows. So in November of 2021, so this would have been the first year of the rollout of these injections, I had a non-clinical staff member come up to me in my office and say, Dr. Biss, can you really believe how many miscarriages we've had this month? We've had 8. Now, my practice is very small. We deliver between 20 and 25 patients a month. So to have 8 losses in 1 month is an extremely high level. So I began to sort of loosely keep track of those numbers. But in the following fall, in October, I went to the inaugural FLCCC conference in Orlando here, and I met Steve Kirsch. And Steve Kirsch did a video of me that went viral, which I, in a few days, got in trouble for by my employer, but that's a whole other story. And he's a numbers guy and immediately wanted statistics from me, and I had told him on the video that my miscarriage rate had gone up by 50%. When I got home, I said, you know what, I better back that up with some solid data. So I went back in my electronic health record and collected 3 things on my patients from January of 2020 until November of 2022. I tracked the miscarriages, the number of deliveries we had, and the number of newly registering first trimester pregnant patients. I sent all that data to Jessica Rose up in Canada, and she published it in her Substack in November of 2022. If anybody wants to reference that, she's got all my data and nice pretty graphs and pictures, etc. And basically what my data showed was I was not correct when I told Steve Kirsch that my miscarriage rate had increased by 50%. It had actually increased by 100% year to year. So Naird et al. Is an article that was written in 2020 showing that the miscarriage rate is about 5 to 6%. It's not the 12 to 15% that some literature will quote and textbooks will quote. It's actually 5 to 6%. And I will tell you that's higher than what I've seen in, almost 30 years of taking care of almost 8,000 pregnant women. In 2020, our average month-to-month miscarriage rate was 4%. In 2021, it doubled to 8%. In 2022, it doubled again to 15%. And that was up till November of 2022 that the data was sent to Jessica. In December of 2022, the miscarriage rate in my practice was 27%. And then in January and February, it had increased to 30%, and that's where it peaked. And then it slowly has trended down to what I would say right now. We are back to our normal rate, and we've probably been back to that rate since this past September. What's concerning is I also tracked in my practice how many pregnant women actually received the injections, and there were about 65% of our pregnant population received the shots, which is commensurate with the Florida vaccination rates of about 65 to 70%. 70 to 80% of those injections were Pfizer. The rest were Moderna and very few J&J. Most of my patients received 2 or 3 injections. Very few had 4 or more. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that the majority of my patients would have received their injections in 2021. And we were still seeing lingering effects moving, into 2022 and 2023. What my data also demonstrated was our delivery numbers had gone down from each year. We had the most deliveries in 2020, and wink, wink, that was probably due to the lockdowns. We had a lot of deliveries in November and December of that year. We've yet to reach the number of deliveries we had in 2020. The other thing that went down was the number of newly registering first trimester pregnant patients, which is a reflection of infertility. And I did have patients that had no problems getting pregnant. We delivered several of their babies, and they ultimately ended up needing in vitro fertilization in order to conceive after they had gotten the injection. So the main thing I tracked was the miscarriage rates, but I will tell you I have seen an increase in my gynecologic patients, abnormal pap smear rates. My rates went up 15%, and that's probably due to the reactivation of the human papillomavirus, which our immune system suppresses. So if you're messing with the immune system with these injections, it'll allow it to resurface, just like many people got shingles, which would be the resurgence of varicella from chickenpox. Breast cancers are through the roof, and I recently received some data. Dr. Ryan Cole sent me some data today showing the study they did in the UK in the working age population. The breast cancer rates went up 28%. Abnormal menstrual bleeding, of course, and in the pregnant population, other than the pregnancy losses, we've seen an increase in hypertensive disorders such as preeclampsia, as well as low amniotic fluid volumes around the babies, and both of those conditions are caused us to deliver our babies prematurely, which is going to result in a baby in the NICU and prolong the mom's hospital stay, so it's not a good situation. The other thing that's a very concern that we've seen increase over the last few years is the amount of postpartum hemorrhaging. Postpartum hemorrhage is defined as a loss of 1 liter or 4 units of blood from a patient within the first 24 hours after birth of their baby, whether it be vaginal or cesarean section birth. And that's usually about 20% of a woman's blood volume. So if she loses that, more than likely she's going to end up needing blood transfusions. But what's concerning is not only is the frequency of this increased, but the methods we normally used in the past to stop the bleeding are not working. We don't know why that is, and we can only theorize that it may be analogous to the myocarditis we know these shots cause, in that the spike in the lipid nanoparticles are getting into the muscle cells of the uterus and not allowing the uterus to do the normal clamp down, as it shrinks down after delivery around the vessels that bleed where the placenta was attached. That whole process may not be happening normally. And sadly, I had to do a hysterectomy on a patient last August because I couldn't stop her bleeding. And it wasn't her first baby, but you can imagine how catastrophic that could be to a woman. She had her first baby, and now you've had to do a hysterectomy, and you've rendered her now unable to have any more babies. And just to put that in perspective, there are OB-GYNs that practice, 10, 20, 30 years and never do a hysterectomy for that indication. So it's not common.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a wide range of concerns that you laid out there, and it's just mind-boggling that we can't get any agencies that are supposed to be concerning themselves with public health to address any of this. This is just a non-issue. And if you listen to Dr. Biss and what she laid out right there, and it's the same thing in our written interview, like I said, it's very straightforward. So why this would be ignored is incomprehensible. There's no excuse for it, in my opinion. And one thing that you did mention in that interview is that there are not many people in your field with the courage to speak out. There are others. I know you're in contact with Dr. James Thorpe, who's going to be a guest on this program, I believe May 17th, I believe he's scheduled for, but he's going to be on this program in weeks to come. I know there are a few others, but have any joined your ranks? How are we looking in terms of people in your particular field of expertise speaking out at this point? Are there any new voices?
Whispers in the corner by the water cooler, but I can count on 2 hands how many OB-GYNs have been vocal about the concerns I raised. And there's maybe one other OB-GYN in my particular community here in Florida that speaks out, but really only to me. She would never get on a podcast or, just
out herself.
Kind of, right. There's, 60,000 OB-GYNs in the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, which would include various districts in the United States, Canada, and South American countries. And there are 3 of those members of ACOG that are speaking out about these issues, and we all reside here in Florida. You mentioned Dr. James Thorpe, and he's actually another physician that I met at that FLCCC conference I discussed previously, and he was very excited to find me because he felt very alone, and he, within a week, had me on my first podcast, and from there on out, you couldn't, shut me up.
Right.
And then Dan McDyer is another OB-GYN in Jacksonville, Florida. Dr. Thorpe lives on the panhandle of Florida, and I live down in the Tampa Bay area. But we've been, pretty much the 3 most vocal. Now, there's a doctor, it went out of my, Scott Hankinson, Dr. Hank. He's on Twitter, and he's been very vocal, and he is also in Florida. So, the majority of us are in the state of Florida, probably because, we can speak pretty freely in this state. But, out of the other 60,000, they mostly promote the opposite. They've drunk the Kool-Aid. Most of them have gotten the injections themselves. And they still believe that these, were valid vaccines and should have been given to all our pregnant women. Crazy. And I'm still spoken, I never got these injections, and I'm still spoken about behind my back to this day for not getting them. So it's crazy.
Yeah, I find that amazing, the people who took these lousy injections who think that we think we've missed out on anything. It's like, you could keep that stuff to yourself. I don't feel like I've missed out on anything. On the contrary.
Yeah, and ACOG is still, to this day, recommending that our patients that are thinking of having a baby, pregnant, or breastfeeding, get these injections.
What happened to the sanctity of pregnancy, right? You don't experiment with babies and pregnant women. It's unbelievable, this fast and loose approach to pregnancy and to women's health and the health of babies, future generations. I'm so disappointed in our human race, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm glad you brought up future generations, Jeremiah, because that's a very big concern. We have a drug in our past that we should have learned from before recommending these injections, was called DES, or diethylstilbestrol. And that was a drug that was given to women early on in the pregnancy in order to prevent miscarriage and preterm labor. And they found that ultimately was not working to prevent those conditions, so they stopped using it. But then they discovered in the 70s that the female offspring of women who received that drug during pregnancy were at higher risk for malignancies, specifically cervical cancer. They're called DES daughters, and, they have to get pap smears for life because they have an increased risk for that problem. So, we should have been very suspect with giving a pregnant patient something so brand new out of the gate. And within 4 months after the Pfizer trials, of which no pregnant women were studied, by the way, men were told to not have sex, and if you have sex, wear 2 condoms. They did not want any pregnancies in these trials. However, almost 300 women did get pregnant, and the aftermarket information shows that 87% of them miscarried. So Pfizer knew this, and ACOG probably knew this. And 4 months into the rollout, they basically started the safe and effective mantra and wanted everybody to get these injections. And we've now had literature come out showing that just in this year in our Gray Journal, the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, fully intact messenger RNA is found in umbilical cords and placentas, which means it's going to the babies. And what does this mean for the babies? Because if this is getting into the gametes, which are either the germ cells that turn into sperm or eggs, if this genetic material is getting into their gametes, what does this mean for future generations? And oh, by the way, lipid nanoparticle technology was developed way back when in order to cross barriers in our bodies, such as the blood-brain barrier, and get chemotherapeutics in the brain. So if these injections are getting into our babies, what does this mean for our little baby brains? I mean, these are things we're not going to find out for years to come. And this article I'm referencing, the authors were excited about this. They weren't concerned that this was a thing. And, when a woman is provided a vaccine, like the flu, the tetanus one for pertussis, and the new RSV vaccine, the idea behind that is that the woman will make antibodies to that protein, and then the antibodies will passively cross into the baby, so the baby will supposedly be protected from that infection when the baby's born, although we've never had any studies showing that vaccine antibodies are better than maternal naturally occurring antibodies. We don't really know that, but that's the theory. We don't give a vaccine so the vaccine goes across into the baby. That's not the idea behind any of this. So this is really concerning to me because I think we're going to be seeing problems, in the next few decades. And we've known, this is the RNA, but we've known for at least 2 years now, Dr. Ryan Cole and the late Dr. Arne Burkhardt in Germany have several slides showing spike protein in every organ of the body. The early Pfizer rat trials that the Japanese obtained through a FOIA request showed that the lipid nanoparticles go everywhere in the body. None of this stuff stays in your arm. And the lipid nanoparticles are fat, and what like fat? All are endocrine organs. And the highest concentration in the rats of these lipid nanoparticles was the rat ovaries. So if you have a developing fetus that's female, and this crosses into that baby, it's probably getting into her ovaries, which by 22 weeks of gestation, that female will have all the germ cells that are going to turn into eggs that she'll ever have her whole life. They don't get regenerated. So what does that mean? Again, we won't know until that child either doesn't go through puberty or when that person's older may not, may be rendered infertile. So it's very concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. I've made the simple comment that if the government were to have mandated everyone has to eat a fresh apple, they would have killed thousands of people in the process of doing that, because there are actually thousands of people in the country who are severely allergic to apples, which might be a healthy thing for most people. So we know that people are different. It's actually part of human evolution that we're not subject to the same things. We have different allergies, different vulnerabilities. It's part of the survival of our species. So to just implement something across the board is necessarily going to be harmful to a subpopulation within the larger population necessarily. But I'm so curious, actually. I am genuinely curious. If you listen to this program, we've raised the question of these injections falsely marketed as vaccines, and we're trying to track down how and at what rate are these injections harming people, or have they harmed people now with, as we get into long-term side effects. We're past the short-term phase in most cases, and now we're sort of nervously anticipating what some of the long-term effects can be. And my question for you, Dr. Biss, is a question that's sort of a running theme when I get to talk to an expert such as yourself, because I still am not clear on what the case is in terms of, is it possible for someone to have received one of these injections and to have been unaffected by it, basically? Because I have such a hard time understanding that medically. We've had some people on this show who have said, hey, look, if you received your shots and you haven't had any side effects and you haven't had your boosters, let's just say you're in the clear. And I would like to believe that, and I hope so, because many people I care about took these shots, which I think was a terrible mistake, of course. People would know my position on that. But is it possible that someone has received one of these shots and they're just unaffected? Because it's so hard to understand how one person receives their shot and they have a lifelong neurological problem, it seems, severe neurological problems, or they suffered cardiac arrest and they're cardiac patients, or they have a rare cancer and now they're in cancer treatment shortly thereafter their injection. I know people who personally who are all three of those cases. So how is it possible that someone could be so severely injured on the one hand, and then another person just says, oh, I'm fine. I'm going to go get my next booster next week. I'm fine. What's your theory? What's your belief? How is it that some people are so severely injured? Some people don't appear to be injured. It's such a hard thing to gauge, right, in terms of the lifespan of a person. Right now, it's sort of a wild card factor. Like, if someone dies at 72, maybe if they didn't receive the shot, they would have lived till they were, 76 or 78, right? There's no way of actually knowing the effects on people long term to some extent, right? What's your feeling about it? What do you believe? What do you think in terms of the broad harm? Which I'll say one last thing before you answer, Dr. Biss, which is, let's say, for example, these shots are injuring people at a relatively low rate, like 1 in 10,000 or something like that. It might not be noticeable in general, but it's still a very high rate considered how vastly these products were administered to people, right? Like, it could be a very small percentage, but a very large number of people ultimately who are injured, which raises another question. Why do we need to take this collateral damage approach to health? But sorry for my long-winded statement question. What's your gauge on, is it possible for somebody to have received these shots and have not been harmed? Is that possible, in your opinion?
Yeah, so from what I've learned over the last 2 to 3 years is that the quality control with making vials was essentially non-existent. I mean, Sasha Latipova has a Substack as well, and she goes into this pretty deep. But basically, these injections that our government called vaccines are actually countermeasures, and the whole program was run through our Department of Defense. So even though the FDA was granting emergency use authorization, they pretty much didn't have any control over these injections because it was all done through the Department of Defense. And when you are making a countermeasure for something, you don't have to follow the same guidelines and go through all the hoops and hurdles that a standard pharmaceutical would have to do. And one of the things that is not, I can pretty much guarantee wasn't done was, when all these vials were coming down the assembly line, normally, you take every 10 or 20 off the machine and open it up and test it and be sure, all the vials contain the same ingredients. And I don't believe that was ever done. And so I think, frankly, there's probably people that got a dud or just saline or broken down products because, remember, this had to be a negative whatever degree stored at substance, and people were driving up to sport arena parking lots and rolling down their windows, and somebody's injecting a substance into their arm that was sitting in a cooler. This is not, a cooler is not negative whatever degrees, right?
Right.
So I think there's two things that were happening here. There's that where people either got, broken down stuff that was no longer going to do anything to them, or just saline. But we do know that there are a lot, ID lot, numbers,
right,
that are tied to a lot of the vaccine injured people, and you can find out your ID number on a website. I think it's called How Bad Is My Batch or something.
Right.
But I will tell you, too, I mean, in going down many rabbit holes with traditional childhood vaccines, lot numbers are spread throughout the country. They won't send one lot number, to any one area of our country, because if something's going to go wrong in the people that receive those injections, they don't want clusters of sick people. So if you have, 10 people that
How
die
considerate
from the
of
vaccine,
them.
yeah, but they're all over the country, right? Nobody's going to bat an eye. But if you have 10 people die of something in St. Pete, Florida, that might raise some eyebrows.
Right.
So this is something that's been going on for a while. And, if you want to look at it from a nefarious perspective, I mean, there's ways, first of all, the messenger RNA is injected into people, but there's definitely this concept of shedding, through your breath and body fluids. Obviously, Pfizer was concerned of that when they told the men not to have sex, but if you do, wear 2 condoms. Obviously, they knew something was going to come out in body fluids. We know that this messenger RNA is found in human breast milk. And babies were reacting from that, so that also opens the door for, ingesting messenger RNA, that they're trying to put in their food and everything, because these babies were, breastfeeding, and then they were breaking out in rashes, etc. But there's definitely shedding. Women that have been studied with the abnormal menstrual period, not every one of them that had an abnormal menstrual period got the injection themselves, but they were around someone else who had been injected. So what is being shed is the question. Definitely probably the spike protein. So, if you were only exposed to the spike protein, you're not going to have necessarily all the reactions, the autoimmune stuff, whatever, that a lot of our vaccine injured are having. But, the spike protein has been shown to be a contributing factor in the cancers we're now seeing, because it interferes with a P53 cancer prevention pathway in our body. So, that would be something that would be delayed, right? And that's what we're seeing now. So, initially, if you had these injections and you got really sick with a high fever, was out of work for a few days, I mean, I think there's no question that you got the real deal. But if you got this injection, you didn't have any reaction, more than likely you probably got a dud, because I can't imagine, Jeremiah, that anybody would have gotten the real thing and not had some sort of reaction.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, we can't, like you said, there's different batches. We can't also assume that people necessarily receive the same substance or the same quality of substance country to country to country. There's so many, I point out repeatedly, it's like you have the development of these products, you have the manufacturing of the products, you have the distribution of the products, you have the administration of the products. There's many tiers at which this could go wrong. So the whole notion, oh, nothing could go wrong, how silly. No, it's silly of you to think that something couldn't go wrong. Absolutely. I mean, these are huge undertakings at every step, right? I would like to ask you, Dr. Biss, in terms of, you had a really interesting answer to this question in our written interview, and I would love for you to share with the audience just how you've personally been changed. I know you've stated that this experience of the past 4 years has been quite an eye-opening experience, but sort of a continuation of your own sort of process of personal awakening and enlightenment that actually predated these events, and then this kind of just pulled the curtain right out of the way, and now you seem to have a different vision of things than maybe you would have just 5 or so years ago. How have you changed in terms of your perspective around medicine, being a part of the community of doctors, the medical industrial complex, what have you? How have you personally changed your perspective?
Yeah, so for me personally, I started questioning Big Pharma and Big Food back in 2015-ish when I started really looking at food and trying to find a diet that was going to work for me. And ultimately that was the ketogenic way of eating, which I've been practicing since 2018. But in my journey of learning nutrition, because, by the way, folks, physicians don't learn a lot about nutrition because allopathic physicians, which is what, the most common physician you'll find, we're treated the big pharma way, which means you have a problem, here's a pill, and we're not treated about, taught about how to treat people with food and lifestyle changes. I mean, even Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. We're taught, we're basically, turned into legalized drug dealers, really. So it was because of my personal experience with going down those rabbit holes with big food, big pharma, it wasn't hard for me to question a lot of the things that were going on with COVID initially, what they were having us do with regards to lockdowns, masks, etc. And I became very leery of this brand new novel technology. And I've been asked a lot about, well, how come so many doctors just fell in step and did everything they were told to do? And I think that goes back to when I started medical school in the early 1990s. The concept of evidence-based medicine began, and that was basically where, somebody decides the evidence, which we now know, like all our literature and research, is very corrupted. But there's evidence that's decided, and whenever we're trying to diagnose something in a patient, we go down a series of steps on an algorithm, and then there's a cookbook that tells us how we're going to treat that problem. So what does that do? That makes everything very uniform. Everything's right there in front of you, and it makes you not have to think. And it also makes you not question authority. So here we are, in 2020, where doctors are not really critically thinking and looking at what we're telling our patients to do and not treat and not use drugs we had on the shelves, such as ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and other drugs, to treat COVID as an outpatient so you wouldn't end up in the hospital, but merely just do what Tony Fauci and the CDC say to do. And, at the time, I was newly the chief of the medical staff of my 480-bed hospital. And, I'm trying to navigate this pandemic, and I just quickly realized that nobody around me was thinking. Everybody was so afraid, they thought everybody was going to perish. I mean, it was crazy. And within a year of being the chief of staff, I decided to give a lecture to my medical staff members. We meet monthly, and I discussed, how these injections work. I discussed how they were already failing in Israel at the time because they were on their booster by July of 2021, and all their ICUs were full of sick people with COVID that had been injected. And I brought up outpatient COVID treatment. And the very next day, 3 physicians stormed into the president of the hospital's office and demanded I not only be taken down as chief of staff, but asked to resign from the medical staff and the hospital, of which at that point, for over 20 years, I had been in good standing. So, I quickly realized I couldn't have any discussions with anybody. And I was told by my boss, I'm not employed by the hospital, but I'm employed by a large organization that has a chief medical officer, that I had to toe the line or I would lose my job. And I was not allowed to prescribe any of my patients hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin for COVID, and that I was supposed to give everybody these injections, which I never recommended. And we were never a vaccination center. So, but it was very lonely until I met my tribe. That's not here in St. Pete. It's kind of all over the globe now. In the latter portion of 2022 and the early portion of 2023, when I made an account on Twitter. And, I'm just those are my peeps now. And, but sadly, I had made the decision to stop practicing obstetrics about a year and a half ago, and I haven't, that ended in December of last year because I'm so closely watched with how I treat my obstetric patients that I couldn't do it anymore because there's so many things we do to our patients that are just harming them. And I just couldn't be a part of that anymore. So I have a lot more leeway with my gynecologic patients, and I can do with them what I want, basically, and I counsel them all on the dangers of these injections. And every day they tell me a story of something that either they're going through or their husband or a relative or a friend with either a medical condition, a blood clot, or a cancer. And it's very sad and draining, but, we just, those of us in the medical freedom movement, we just have to keep moving on and make this not be a normal way that we treat people with regards to this messenger or RNA technology, because that's what's coming down the pike. It's very quick to make vaccines using that technology. Very lucrative for the company that makes them.
Right.
So,
I find that amazing, the people who are so concerned about so-called grifters who are profiting from this, but they have no concern whatsoever about the hand-over-fist profit that mega corporations made, which makes, the money that the so-called grifters may have made just inconsequential. I mean, these people have made money. I don't know the grand total of the profits that they've received liability-free. I mean, wow, what a great deal. You have liability protection and can just, go stomping around the globe making unbelievable profit. Your son is a phenomenally talented artist. Not to change the subject, but we are approaching the end of the program, and I definitely want you to give a shout-out to your son, who's making some moves. I want to work with him. I hope we can have that conversation. I want to be a part of the production team. But I've worked with legendary MCs. Your son is an MC, right? He raps?
No, so my son is Zachary, but he streams a lot of his music on Spotify, and he goes by the name Alcinous, Alcinous, which I think was a character in the Odyssey.
Let's spell that again one more time, slowly.
Alcinous.
Okay, excellent. So guys, write that down.
And the music he streams on Spotify is lo-fi hip-hop, I think is how you would describe it, but there's no lyrics. It's all music, and a lot of kids, like in college, will listen to it as background music while they're doing their
okay. I
homework
understand
and
that.
stuff
That's really cool.
Yeah, so he does, however, he's self-taught. He plays guitar and a lot of other instruments, and early on we got him into voice lessons, and as a sophomore in high school, he started gigging in local bars. My husband would have to get a permit for him every time he had a gig from Tallahassee because he was under 18.
Right.
But by the time he left for college, he had $50,000 in the bank from gigging, and he went to Belmont University in Nashville, got a music business degree, thought he was going to do the country music route, but quickly decided that wasn't his jam, and he also quickly learned how corrupt the industry is with regards to record contracts and et cetera. So he decided to come back home to St. Pete when he graduated, and with his money, he moved right into a 2-bathroom, 3-bedroom home across the street from us, and he gigs in town, which pays his mortgage, and he also streams the music on Spotify. So he's actually over 1.6 million streams at this point, so that's money, and he's planning on traveling the world, and he is learning Portuguese because he wants to go spend some time in Portugal.
Wow, that's
So,
phenomenal. Wow, what an
yeah.
incredible thing. That's definitely something to be proud of for sure. That's really an incredible story. Yeah, like I said, I would love to work with him. So, folks, we're 9 minutes away from the end of the program. If you want to call in, the number is 888-874-4888. We don't have much time. If you have a specific question for Dr. Kimberly Biss, now would be your chance. But in the meantime, let me emphasize that, of course, this is a listener-sponsored program. Every bit of support that you can lend to what we're doing here is greatly appreciated. I do take time to produce these shows, to prepare myself for these sort of intricate conversations outside of my normal wheelhouse, which is just music and philosophy and just generally talking about the problems of life. I am not a scientist. I'm not a lawyer. I bring these experts on to educate myself as well as you. We're all being educated by these phenomenal guests at the same time. So if you can, please support by subscribing to my Substack, Jeremiah Hosea, JeremiahHosea. That's also my website, jeremiahhosea.com. You can buy a song just for $1. That helps keep the wagon wheel rolling. I also am a chess teacher, as you guys know. I'm the founder of Remote Learning Chess. That was founded in reaction to being locked at home and being unable to teach chess, which is what I do primarily for my income for the past, 10 years or so. I've been teaching chess for 20 years. At a certain point, I went from being a full-time musician and a part-time chess teacher to being the opposite, full-time chess teacher, part-time musician. But some people have actually finally, it took a long time, kind of surprisingly long time from my point of view, but some people have taken me up finally on sponsoring chess lessons for young people in their family. And believe me, it's incredibly beneficial, guys. Consider that as a gift. I'm a very passionate teacher. I'm very experienced. I've been teaching for over 20 years. I work with players of all different levels and experience levels, different ages, not just for kids. I've taught elderly people who said, hey, better late than never, and still decided to take chess lessons in their 70s or 80s. So consider chess lessons. It's an incredible instrument of the mind. And the website is remotelearningchess.com. Send me an email. Let's set up some lessons. In the meantime, did I hear the phone ring? Is someone on the line? Dylan? Ryan? Did the phone ring? Do we have a call?
Yes, we do. We have Dion in Brooklyn.
Oh, excellent. Okay, Dion in Brooklyn. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for calling in. Do you have a question for Dr. Kimberly Biss?
Yes, I do. So with this shedding, for those of us, and thank you so much for this great program and in what you're doing.
Thank
for
you.
those of us who didn't take the vaccine, but in New York, we're around people who do, and the shedding, what do we do to help prevent or negate any side effects and what are some of the dangers that we could come down with for the shedding, being that we have to maybe work around and go to medical places and we're exposed now. So I'm concerned about health, and I'm sure the rest of us are.
Good
So
question.
just anything you can give. Thank you so much. I'll just listen.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Fortunately, with the latest booster that was out last fall, I mean, I think the uptake in our country was not even 10%, and globally, it's pretty similar to that. So we're not really walking amongst a lot of people anymore that have recently been injected, and the majority of the people in our country probably were injected, back in 2021, and maybe got another booster the following year. There's very few that have gotten. I think if you did it with all the boosters, you could have gotten 9 injections by this point, but those people are few and far between. But if there is shedding of spike protein, there are ways that your body can get rid of the spike protein. First and foremost, you need to eat food that looks like food. You need to stay out of the middle of the grocery store. You only buy things in the periphery. If you can grow your own food, that would be great. But if you go to the grocery store, fruits, vegetables, meats, fish, etc., nothing that comes in a box. intermittent fasting or prolonged fasting has been shown to help our body get rid of the trash, so to speak. And that helps us to get rid of bad cells or cells that aren't functioning well, and even the spike protein. There is something I learned at the latest FLCCC conference that helps our body to get rid of the spike protein, and it's called baobab fruit. So it's Baobab, I believe, fruit. It's a tree that produces a fruit that's grinded down into a powder. You can buy it on Amazon. And what you do is you take about a tablespoon of it and mix it in 16 ounces of water and sip it throughout the day. And that helps to get rid of the spike protein, but it also works kind of like a baby aspirin that we're told to take by our physicians, which will allow us to not make blood clots in our body. So those are some, natural ways to kind of mitigate what might be happening to you if you're exposed to somebody that may be shedding.
Well, that's really solid advice in general. And, that is a concern that many of us have, and rightfully so. I mean, it just seems like we're just kind of waiting to see, well, how has our human race been affected by all of this in the long run? I think we're still awaiting the information, like with this issue of DNA plasmid contamination. We discussed that with Jessica Rose, who you mentioned earlier. I used the analogy of it's like we're approaching a haunted house. We know something really spooky is inside, but we're not sure what's going to happen when we open the door. That's what it feels like. But I want to thank you, Dion, for your call. It's really appreciated, and thank you for listening. Thank all of you guys for listening. Please do whatever you can do to make people aware of this program. It is really a labor of love, and the whole point of the program is to educate the public. I mean, that's explicitly the point of this program. And bear in mind, I'm not a university professor. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a PhD. I say repeatedly, I claim no credentials in any of those things. I am a bass player. I've performed live on television. I've performed live on radio. I've played on a Grammy-nominated recording. I played on and produced an Emmy-nominated recording. I'm an experienced bass player, experienced chess teacher. I'm a father, married father of 2 beautiful children, and that's who I am. I'm just here gathering information, trying to figure everything out like everybody else who's trying to figure things out. I do not in any instance assert myself as an authority on these matters. But I think, first of all, if we're not experts, we still have the right to ask questions. That's the premise of this program. We have every right to try as well as we can to understand what's going on. And no, I do not believe in a technocracy where we'll be led by experts who do all the thinking for us. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think that's a good idea. I think we should all do our best to understand as well as we can what's happening to us, what's happening in the world around us. But that was episode 37 of the Bassline, everyone. We just completed 37 consecutive weeks of independent radio. And by the way, just so you know, the PRN network has invited me onto this station and have given me an opportunity to produce this program. I have been questioned by no one about anything that I present. I'm just basically given a microphone and airwaves. It's been a totally incredible experience, and this is exactly as you hear it. This is not produced or edited by any sort of intermediary or anything like that. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Dr. Kimberly Biss. You are truly a phenomenal individual. I thank you for your courage. I thank you for your wisdom. And the more people can hear you speak out, the better, as far as I'm concerned, because your message is very straightforward, as I've said repeatedly. I think, the straightforward, clear nature of your message is very powerful. So people need to just start basically grappling with the facts as well as we can gather them. So thank you, Dr. Biss. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and please stay in touch.
Will do. Thank you so much, Jeremiah.
Thank you.
It was not the Pharisees. It was not the just seem to